So we're going to segue into the changes that have come about because of the Jobs Act that was recently passed, and how those specifically affect the changes that affect our community specifically.
Very good. So I'm going to make this quick. Please try to take notes. There's also a handout on the tables in front. If you've got the handouts, pass them back, okay? Because I'm gonna go through this very, very quickly. So I'm Bill Cunningham, all right? My background is trained as an economist out of the University of Chicago. One of my professors was Gary Becker, Milton Friedman, George Stigler, all of the Chicago free market guys. Now, I mention that for a reason, because I'm going to leapfrog Dave's comments and place some context in back of them, and then I'm going to bring you forward to where we are now. So, my background is that I sued the Federal Reserve on June 18th, 1998 to block the relaxation of something called Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall is a law that separated commercial banks from investment banks. In my briefing, I said, if you get rid of this law, 10 years later, there's going to be a crisis. Now, I was alone. No other American economist made that prediction. So I have another handout which talks about that. Now, the other thing that I do is I look for ways to make free markets and capital markets work for communities of color. So what we did back in '91 was we created the first mortgage-backed security backed by loans from black-owned banks. Okay, 1991. That's, again, on the other handout. You go to creativeinvest.com. We go through all of this. I'm telling you all of this for a reason, because I want to point to the product innovation and the kind of work that we're doing and bring it forward. So, one of the things that we noted back in 2006 was a continuing lack of capital, certainly in the African American community. We thought about ways to bring free market economics to bear on that issue. Came up with something called the Microcredit Stock Exchange. 2006, Microcredit Stock Exchange. Microcredit is small-scale loans, typically, to community businesses. We said, why not have a stock exchange that does that? That idea percolated, it became crowdfunding. Now, crowdfunding, let me describe what crowdfunding is. Crowdfunding is open source financing. How many people have heard of Indiegogo, Kickstarter? Indiegogo, Kickstarter. Okay, that is crowdfunding, but that is donations-based crowdfunding. All right? The Jobs Act, and on the back of the handout are the two books that I've written on crowdfunding and the Jobs Act. The Jobs Act allows equity crowdfunding, which is you have a company, you sell shares of stock in your company to people in your crowd. You know, anybody in your crowd. Kickstarter is a product. I have a new kind of cup, and I'm going to put that up online, and people are going to get excited by this cup. There are a couple of brothers that invented a coffee cup that brews the coffee in the cup. So that's an example of the kind of innovation that donations-based crowdfunding facilitates. What you're doing is you're buying the product. That's all. You're pre-ordering the product. Some of the marquee crowdfunding campaigns to be aware of, the Pebble Watch. They raised $10 million. Also, on your handout, I mentioned Glowforge. Glowforge is a 3D printer that was they created their own crowdfunding platform. They raised $28 million to create this 3D printer. Okay? Donations-based. I see you looking. You're like, $28 million. Holy moly, how do I get in on that? Glowforge.com. Look at what they did. Now, the keys to donation-based crowdfunding are as follows. Authentication and validation. Authentication is you are who you say you are. You're not some 16-year-old kid sitting in the basement. Indiegogo, Kickstarter, these donations-based platforms link to your social media assets, Facebook, Twitter, that sort of thing. That helps in the identification process. Validation is I can do with the money what I'm saying that I'm going to do with the money. Now, in terms of what you do with the money, for crowdfunding for your companies and for products, it has to be for something that you cannot get at Walmart. Why would I give you $100 and buy something online for a camera that I can get at Walmart? I wouldn't do it. But if you have some type of innovation in this that I can't get anywhere else, I'm in. I'm in big time. Now, that's, again, donation-based, product-based crowdfunding. Where we are, as of April 26th, you will be able to issue shares of stock in your company up to $1 million to anybody online. Equity, shares, ownership stakes in your company raise up to $1 million online through crowdfunding platforms. Okay? So that's the change here. That is particularly significant for us as black people because we have a lot of ideas. We don't have access to capital because the financial institutions discriminate against black people. That's not a secret, right? It's not a surprise to this crowd, right? 1% of venture capital money goes to black people. You telling me that, and so 99% goes to, non-black people, okay? And here's the thing, they lose 80% of that money. Venture capitalists lose 80% of the money that they invest. They make their big returns on a couple of home runs. All right? So you mean to tell me that black people can't lose 80% of the money too, with great ideas? Of course we can, What it is, and if, again, on the handout, there are links to a couple of YouTube videos. So please check out those videos that I've posted on these issues. One talks about venture capital and black people. And it's the same for women, by the way, right? It's the same 5% of venture capital. That's crazy as hell when you think about what's going on here. So crowdfunding exists to excite and move innovation higher. What we're seeing all kinds of crazy creativity. And I'll just mention 3 things really quickly. We're working with a firm, black-owned firm, trying to convert municipal solid waste to electrical energy. We're working with a firm, not black-owned, that is looking at crowdfunding farmland, but they want to reach out to black people who own farmland. So, as y'all know, some of our families back in South Carolina, North Carolina, some of them still own farmland, but it's rapidly disappearing. So these guys want to collect all of that together, give you an opportunity to invest in an acre of farmland for $100, for $200, for $1,000, okay, as a way of preserving that. And then we're working with an Asian East Indian guy who wants to make films in the U.S., and he's a U.S. born and raised here, but his parents are from India. He wants to make films that appeal to that demographic of Indians in the U.S. Brilliant idea, creative. Who knows if he'll be able to do it? It doesn't matter. Part of what we see is we see people coming. Oh, and last thing, I know a lot of I do. Okay, all right, very good. Let me refer to the handout, the chart on the handout. Let me point out what that is. That chart lists Kickstarter crowdfunding campaigns. Every Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign up to February 16, 2016. What I want to point out here is as follows. The black bar, so there have been 100,358 successful crowdfunding projects on Kickstarter as of February 16, 2016. The thing to note is that most of those, 58% of those projects, have raised between $1,000 and $10,000. There have been 152 Kickstarter projects which have raised over $1 million. My point is this. You're not going to raise $1 million on Kickstarter. All right? You're not. It's very hard work. It's very hard work. But you probably could raise $1,000. Yeah, right? With your crowd. One of the things you have to do is you have to get your crowd to provide 20% of the initial funds. This is donations-based crowdfunding only. You have to get your crowd to validate and speak for you. Oh yeah, I know that guy. He's all right. He's not a kid sitting in his basement somewhere, All right, I'll chip in $100. People see that and it takes off. That's how these things go viral. So, if you look at this chart, what you want to do is you want to move this way. Start out with a $1,000 donation-based crowdfunding campaign for something interesting. Then come back 6 months, 9 months later, do one for $10,000. Then come back, do one for $100,000. So on and so forth. So that you can get a feel for how crowdfunding works. And as I mentioned, it is hard work. You have to call everybody you've ever known and beg for money, basically, on the donation side. But it's great training for the equity side. Last thing, so with respect to black people in equity crowdfunding, what are we proposing? So we're proposing, there's a part of Washington, D.C. called Anacostia. It's actually the most valuable part of Washington, D.C. When Lafayette designed the city, he intended for that to be the part of the city that the elite held on to, because it has views that look down on the city. It's not that way currently. It's actually one of the poorest parts. It's 3 out of 4 children in that area live in poverty. So what we've suggested is that you buy a commercial property in Anacostia, put in a Starbucks. Let's say you buy it for $850,000, and you put a Starbucks in that building, okay? What you do is you go back to the community and offer them equity stakes, ownership stakes in that business for $100, all right? So that people in the community, and the asset, this is the important point, the asset of the business is that building, right? It's the franchise too, but the building is what gives that proposal real juice, because you have an asset that you can attach, right? And we all know where, as this area gentrifies, the value of that commercial property is going to go. So this is a way for community residents to profit in a way that they have not been able to do thus far from gentrification. That's where we're kind of seeing, that's what we're moving out on. A couple of other things really to end. There's some current news items with respect to crowdfunding that are also included on the handout. 3 things I'll go over. If you're serious about this, you'll look at a firm called Fundrise. Fundrise. They are the biggest real estate crowdfunding platform in the U.S. They got $30 million equity investment from the Chinese. You know, so they're huge. They just fired their CFO like yesterday for trying to extort money from people who are coming to the real estate platform. So the reason I mention that is that this continued level of unethical behavior that we've seen in the financial marketplace over the past 20 years continues to bleed into this side. So it's just something to be aware of. We're also seeing on the farmland and food side some very interesting developments with respect to crowdfunding food. There are people in the diaspora, let's say you're from Kenya, and there's a certain cassava melon or yam or something that you can get in Kenya, you can't get over here. People are beginning to go to farmers and have them grow that particular crop and sell it to people in that community, right? So there's a crowdfunding site called Barn Raiser, which is doing that. And then I mentioned Glowforge, $28 million, product donations-based crowdfunding for a 3D printer. You could do the same thing for your company. You could, if your company, and that was the other thing. So I run a DC equity crowdfunding meetup every month in Washington, D.C. Brother shows up yesterday, right? He's got this product of athletic shoes that hook onto some tension belts that you put around your waist. I never heard of this thing before, right? Guy's doing brilliant. He's got Michael Vick. He's got a bunch of other athletes. Apparently, you can tailor this to a specific, sport, right? So if you're in baseball, you can structure it so that it helps you out in baseball. If you're in football, you can structure it so it helps you out in football. If you're in wrestling, brilliant concept. So we've encouraged him to look at crowdfunding for his company and for that product. You can imagine that he could post a crowdfunding campaign where you pay $100 for the shoes and maybe $5 for a share of stock in his company if you are so inclined. Last thing, since we got Nestle on the panel, the other strategy and tactic that we're encouraging black people to use is if you have a contract from Nestle for $500,000. You know that you can factor that. In other words, there are large, greedy financial institutions who will take that $500,000 contract, pay you $400,000. All right, you do all the work, they keep $100,000. It is what it is, okay? What we're suggesting is that there is a way to use that contract to eliminate the middleman. And remember, crowdfunding and these market innovations are all about eliminating the middleman. The white venture capitalist who won't give you, make an investment in you, the white bank, Wells Fargo, other guys who won't give you a small business loan, eliminate them. We don't need them. The technology allows you to leapfrog them. So, you take your contract from Nestle and you post it online. You say, listen, I've got this asset, a contract for $500,000 from Nestle. I am going to raise equity capital to support my company. That's where we see this moving. I think I'm done. Did I leave anything else?
Bill's like one of those preachers that kept saying one more time, one more time. So since Nestle is on this, and